Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Prall from Little Falls PD in New Jersey, 21 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Prall. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Of course. So 21 years. Was there like an instrumental event or something that happened where you were like, yes, law enforcement is the career for me, or how did you get started?
Well, I was in the Marine Corps,
Okay.
so I guess my journey started a little bit before that, just kind of like the call to public service. So when I was in high school, I took a EMT class, and then I started volunteering. I was 17, senior in high school, volunteering for one of the local ambulances. And then when it became 18, I joined the volunteer fire department here in town. And I guess it was just a progression of service. Um, I answered the call. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I did 4 years there. And then afterwards, I worked some government consulting, got finished my education, got my degree, and then I came here back to Little Falls, where my brother was employed as a police officer.
Wow. So you're essentially your whole life has been in the kind of the first responder,
Yeah.
public safety profession.
And I just turned 48, so that's over 30 years in,
Wow.
public service, or however you want to, put that caveat onto it, but
Yeah.
in service of others.
Yeah. I love that. I really, I've been thinking about this a lot, about hindsight and being able to look back on our lives and our career and kind of look at the wins and maybe some of the I don't want to say failures because I think there's such a bad rep when we say failures. I actually think that we learn from everything. But if you look back on your life and your career, um, what is maybe one valuable lesson that you learned, whether it was from a success or from a quote unquote failure?
Well, I think some of our greatest lessons learned are from failure.
I agree.
It's not what you do in the face of the failure, it's what you do afterwards. So, I've always kind of impressed it upon myself to just kind of pick yourself up. Okay, what did we learn out of that situation, Brian? Don't obviously repeat those, but move forward. And there's a lot of wisdom involved in failure. And I feel like that I've been fortunate enough in both my law enforcement career and in the military. I've worked for some very good leaders. I've worked for some very bad leaders. And you pick up the good from the good ones, from the bad ones. You're like, okay, I'm not going to repeat that, but there's a lesson there. And then you craft your own leadership style going forward. Uh, and I think one of the greatest lessons for anybody that's looking to get into the profession, there is a trade-off, right? So there are pieces of you, of your individuality, your personality that's going to change. The way that you look at the world inevitably changes. You can go through the Gil Martin book and look about the cynicism that kind of becomes rampant in this profession. So I think awareness of those things when you're young and you're early in your career, when you're still riding the highs of the hypervigilance, understand that that's a cycle, that's a biological cycle, and there are trade-offs to devoting yourself to the profession.
Yeah. I just had another chief say something where they were like, this job's going to take a lot of pieces of you, and the goal is to try to get to the end of the career with as many pieces of you left,
Right.
and there was a whole conversation about that. But I do think that we're shaped by the experiences that we have in our lives, whether that's personally or professionally. And there are things that will inevitably change us. And I think that this word change is always looked at in a really negative way. And I think we can start to look at it from both sides of the coin. There are some things that maybe are not a positive change, and we want to make sure that we can be proactive and try to reduce the risk of that happening, and kind of be aware of maybe what some of those negative, I'll put that in quotes, like changes really are. But there's a lot of change that can be really positive too.
Right.
We can grow and we can develop and we can evolve. And I've been thinking about this idea of discomfort and change because change is inevitable.
Mhm.
I mean, you and I, we're getting older every day, right? Like I'm the youngest I'm ever going to be right now. Tomorrow I'm going to be older. There's going to be another gray hair that I got to pluck out of my head. Like we're always in this state of change. Um, and I think that we are also as humans so uncomfortable with change. Like we want things to stay as they are and kind of in our like bubble of comfort and, maybe predictability. But my thought is, we know that it's inevitable, but like, what if that change on the other side of it is achievement? We're so afraid to fail, but what if that failure leads to success? And so I really like what you said about, how sometimes the biggest growth opportunities, and learning opportunities and successes come from those failures. And how can you learn from it and grow from it and be better because of it?
Right. Yeah, and you want to just substitute the word metamorphosis for change, right?
Mhm.
So you're gonna eh, whatever experience that you may have gone through, right? You're gonna get into that little cocoon. You're gonna write yourself, and then afterwards you're gonna emerge kind of like a bigger, better, stronger, more beautiful thing, like the butterfly. Um, and I've had those glimmers and glimpses throughout my law enforcement career. Um, you know, and I feel that some people don't emerge better because of those. They kind of become self-defeated within those cocoons. And they maybe lack, the coping mechanisms in the adversity, or they turn towards, substance abuse or, other things that are more detrimental than looking at the positive. Um, and I've always tried to see the positive, this find the silver lining in everything.
Yeah.
You can't take this job too seriously. I mean, obviously there are times outward facing that we have to, present that appearance to the public and, the political structure and, those things. But internally in the conversations we have amongst ourselves, you can kind of make light of those things. And I think you have to for your own clarity and your own mental health, and look for the positive. I always have those conversations internally. It could be worse, right? You got a roof over your head, you got chow in your belly. I woke up on the correct side of the ground today. Things could be a lot worse for me. So you kind of embrace that mentality. You approach every day looking at it like that, and I'm going to move forward. No matter what today throws at me, I'm going to get through it. The sun's going to go down and it's going to come back up tomorrow, and tomorrow's a new opportunity to do something else.
I'm a huge fan of gratitude and having a positive mental perspective or attitude towards things. And it's easier said than done. I'm fully aware of that. I'm not perfect by any means. I definitely have times where woe is me and everything is, bleak and, it's all crumbling and, but as much as I possibly can. And I do think that it's mental training. I think that if we can look at this as like a consistent exercise that we do, just like we do with our physical bodies, how can we train our minds to also become stronger, more resilient? And I personally, every day, try to wake up and say three things that I'm grateful for. Some days I can only come up with one, and that's okay. But how can we wake up and understand that there are good things in our lives and there are things to be grateful for. There are ways to look at things with a different perspective. And the more we train ourselves to look for the good things, the more good things we're going to see in our lives and in the world. It's really interesting because, to your point of what you said, it could be worse. If we were to reverse time and we were to go back to like little me, little Paige, at my hardest time in my life, when I was younger, I would be ecstatic to be where I am now. But you get so ingrained in the grind. I think you would feel the same way. Like, little you at 16 kind of getting into this, looking forward and seeing that you're chief of police for an organization. Like, how cool is that? And of course, we have lots of things that happen, but how can we say like, my younger self would have been so proud of me today? I would have been like so stoked to be in the position that I'm in today. So like how
Right.
can we remember that and, celebrate that?
Yeah. And I think that's an important topic. And I do feel though, and it's discussed in the Gil Martin book about the victim mentality,
Yeah.
and we experience that with the officers that we lead. We have to be aware of it and not be guilty of it ourselves, but it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean there's some grand conspiracy here at play, um, and just seeing the negative of things. And that's what, Gil Martin explains because of the hypervigilant roller coaster that we may find ourselves on as first responders, to not just focus on the negative because we're so inclined to go in that direction. And
Yep.
if all you're looking for are negative things, that's all you're going to see.
Yep.
You have to make those substitutions within the mind. And your exercise that you explained, I think, does it great. Find things that you are grateful for, um, and then one little mark of positivity creates another mark of positivity, and then that path just becomes the way.
Yep.
And that's how you can wake up every day and be a little bit more upbeat and a little bit more positive.
Well, and the goal is to keep going. Right? Like how do you get yourself to a mental state where you can have that, we call it the resiliency, right? To be able to like overcome adversity, to be able to keep going, through hard times, through all the times, all the ups and downs. How can we keep you going? And you've mentioned that before, like sometimes we get stuck
Right.
and how can we have those resources and the mental ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep going in a positive trajectory.
Well, there's no better time than the present, right? And you have to look at it like, hey, tomorrow's over. I can't do anything to change it. It's over.
Mhm.
Tomorrow isn't here yet, so there's no point in worrying about tomorrow. It's about today. So
Yep.
I am in control. I'm 100% in control of today, and whatever it looks like. If I
Hmm.
want to make it negative, I can. If I want to sit on the couch and just watch television, that's going to be the reality.
Hmm.
Or you can look at it like, okay, I'm going to do something positive for me today. I'm going to do something positive for the organization. I'm going to try to spread positivity. And you got to be sometimes that very that very low glimmer of light, in the darkness. And I think a lot of our responders are like that, and that becomes infectious. So sometimes, and this goes back to the military, right? uh, some of the worst living conditions I've ever been, susceptible to back in the Marine Corps, sleeping in the ground or being in, a barracks that had a hole in the roof that it would rain on you. Okay, it could be worse. And I always would say this, and I still say it today, that false motivation is better than no motivation.
Mm.
Fake it, fake it until you make it. So
Hmm.
that's where, the men and women in the military, they go through those periods of adversity, but they're going through them together. They're trying to make the positive, look for the positive. They're trying to, not really anything is going to change this situation other than their headspace,
Yeah.
right? I can't change where I am. I can't change the circumstances I'm in, but how I view them and how I look at them, I'm 100% in control of that. So
Well,
for all the control freaks out there, look at it like that.
yeah.
I'm not going to let the situation dictate how I feel about it. I'm going to try to make the most of it, you know?
Yeah, I really am 1000% on board with that. And I've talked about this before on the podcast about the controllable. There's so many things you can't control, but you can control you. You can control your actions and your reactions. I love what you said, false motivation.
False motivation's better than
Better
no
than no
motivation.
motivation. I like that a lot. I had a conversation with an individual who was contemplating suicide, and he tells his whole story about how he was able to overcome this. And he was trying to find positivity and gratitude in his life, and he couldn't find anything. Like in his head, it was like there was absolutely nothing that was positive or that he was grateful for. And he tells this whole story. I'll kind of really condense it in a really small clip. But basically, he ended up buying flowers for himself. And he sat with a notebook in front of these flowers and he artificially created positivity and gratitude through these flowers. He's like, if I can't find anything in my life, like I'm gonna just look at these flowers and try to find like one good thing about this, you know? And he was like, okay, like pretty colors, cool. You know, and then he's like, all right, like, you know, the next day it's like, I like the way that they smell, or I like the way they're blossoming now. And so I like the false motivations better than no motivation. How can we artificially create some things sometimes to get us on that path? You know, how can we sit in front of a flower and recognize, yeah, there is something good here. And
Right.
then we can build upon that.
Yeah, and Admiral McRaven talks about it. He does the commencement speech for might be University of Texas or something, but he says, get up every day, make your bed.
Hmm.
And that one little small thing is a very small act of accomplishment. And
Yeah.
if you start your day by one thing of accomplishment, then you look for the second thing that I can accomplish, and the third thing, and the fourth thing, and the fifth thing, and then you're going to have a productive day if you look at it like that.
Yeah.
So it goes with positivity and movement, and motion creates emotion.
Yep.
Uh, stay busy, stay active. It's all good for your mental health.
Yeah, I do want to talk a little bit on and stay on this topic of resiliency and kind of moving forward. Because for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, your state is kind of leading the charge right now with a resiliency program that I think was implemented by the Attorney General, something of that sorts, correct? So,
Yeah,
can you,
that's correct.
for anyone who doesn't know, can you maybe just give a little bit of a rundown of what the program is? Why it's important, maybe some of the success that you've seen as a result of that program.
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact year, and you can probably edit this in at some point. But the Attorney General did pass, an Attorney General directive or guideline about, resiliency and the creation of these resiliency police officers.
Yeah,
It was a couple of years ago. We have two within the organization. Everything that's said to them is in strict confidence. And then obviously, I am in a position to have information about people that we may want to involve resiliency in. So some personnel, matters, maybe some substance abuse problems. I would prefer that those are dealt with organizationally before it gets to my level, and that's where these resiliency officers can kind of play a part. So we encourage just eyes and ears from the rank and file, and then anything that they're detecting within their coworker, their friends, their union members, we communicate that to the resiliency personnel first. Obviously, if it's detrimental to work, we have to, let the chain of command know. But we can intervene on a resiliency level just to make sure everything is good with you, officer. Everything good at home? Are you having any family problems? Like, what's going on? And they're specifically trained to make referrals outside of like employee assistance. But they do have some resources at the union level. And then if they need to, they can involve the union and they can place the officer and, try to get them the help that they need.
yeah,
So that's how the program started. I think it does. One, it identifies the problem, which is good, right? I think resiliency was always a taboo word, especially early in my career. There was such a stigma around needing to talk to somebody after a critical incident, perhaps, or if you just didn't, if something was bothering you. In my own experiences, I had an in custody death, received very little support from the organization. So I always, in the back of my mind, I have that as a let's not do that if I'm in the position to kind of make a decision.
yeah,
So we do involve resiliency. Um, I've taken it a step farther in the organization. One, we allow like a workout on duty policy, so that's good that we're incorporating that physical health into resilience, and I think they're all part and parcel, right?
yeah,
I think physical health, mental health, financial health, they're all the pillars of resiliency.
yeah,
So we include that. And then this year, through the budget, one thing that I did include was we have a contract with a mental health facility with counselors, and they will do once a year just checkups with you officers. It's all off the record, it's all confidential. Um, and, and hopefully it's just get information. If there's something on the officer's mind, they can discuss it with a professional. The professional can make referrals if they feel like, it needs it warrants something additional. And I'm doing that all out of the budget. So
Yeah. Thank
um,
you.
yeah, we're trying to be proactive on that front. The Attorney General in New Jersey just announced up to $50,000 in reimbursable funding for mental health and for some wellness and resiliency programs. So we're looking to take advantage of that, and then just build upon, kind of the foundation that we've established. So if I could do additional, once a year, if we can do once a quarter, and then maybe include the officer's spouse, significant others, or loved ones, and have them involved because they are a great resource and they're another set of eyes in the household that might be able to recognize something in their loved one that's starting to concern them.
Yeah.
Uh, I typically, unfortunately, people are very reluctant to say that they have a problem, and they need help. And when I'm getting officially notified through the command, we've normally had something that went dysfunctional. All officers are getting in trouble, in the off-duty capacities, whether it's domestic violence, substance abuse. There was some dysfunction earlier on that somebody missed the warning sign. And that's where I think the education and the awareness, one at the officer level, and then with the significant others, their family and friends, perhaps they can be another set of eyes, um, and recognize things before it becomes too detrimental to their careers.
Yeah, there's definitely a few things that I want to kind of dive into that you just said. One of the things that I find really interesting, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, but you said it, you were like, you know, you obviously experienced the stigma yourself, where you experienced things and you did not feel like you could come forward because it was really frowned upon. I guess my question, it's a two-part question. One is, 21 years ago, did you think that we'd be here today doing the things that we're doing and talking about this in the way that we are? But also, coming from, a time where this was really frowned upon and really judged, and there's a huge stigma. How, as a leader, have you been able to kind of evolve and change maybe your perspective or the way that you were raised, to be able to now, as the leader of an organization, be fully, endorsing and prioritizing these things?
I think perspective plays a big part in it. And maybe had I not gone through what I went through and
Yeah.
had the organizational betrayal in my hip pocket, like I wouldn't have that context, right? So empathy is what comes to mind.
Mm.
I've been there, right? And I know what that's like, to not have any answers to my questions, right? To maybe be facing a grand jury indictment, right, over a justifiable homicide. Like, yeah, I've been there. I know what that potentially is like, and it's very stressful. Um, and as a leader of an organization, well, I have the opportunity to perpetuate the bad cycle, or I could take it as, hey, it happened to me. I learned a lot. I'm never going to have that replicate itself here within the organization, and have one of my officers feel the way that I did.
Yeah.
So I look at it as the latter of those. And then you allow the organization to grow. So I'll always have those learning lessons personally, whether I shared them with anybody here today or ever in the future. Like, I know what I know and I know what I learned. But here I have a great opportunity as the chief to kind of perpetuate that organizationally. And hopefully now the organization will never make the same mistake. Um, and I think that's tremendously important.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, um, I have a lot of, I've said this before, but I have a lot of respect for leaders who are challenging the way that things used to be and really trying to look towards the future of saying, how can we do things better? And, how can I take it upon myself to make sure that, I don't make anyone feel the same way that I did in those types of situations. So I do appreciate that a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, so, and it's just the way that my brain has been programmed over, 30 something years of public service is efficiency and effectiveness, right? So those are the two things that I predominantly look for, or I question always as I'm doing things.
Mm.
Is this the most efficient way of doing it? And is this the most effective way of doing it?
Mm, I like that.
And if the answers are no and no, well, then you got to do something about it. So I've done that for a lot of things. We're specifically talking about, mental health and resiliency. So you apply that same concept to that topic, and hopefully I'll leave the organization on better footing than when I found it.
Yeah. It's really interesting and just kind of popped up in my head as you said that. I think when we're looking at external situations, it's easy for us to say, is this effective? Is this efficient? But sometimes when we're thinking about or talking about ourselves, it's hard to have that self-assessment. And it kind of brings me to the next topic that I want to talk to you about because you said this before. You're like, I think it's the burning question for every agency I've ever talked to ever. It's like, how do we get people to want to take care of themselves? How do we encourage that sort of internal conversation and self assessment of, am I being effective and efficient? Are the things that I'm doing, like, are those positive or are they negative? Is this healthy? Is this unhealthy? How do we encourage self assessment of ourselves and others within the organization? How do we get people to want to take care of themselves?
Well, that's if you have that answer, I think that's a billion dollar industry right there.
Yeah. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
here today. No, I'm just kidding.
So that's a tough one. When I look back at my own experiences in my own life, but coming out of COVID, I was 220 pounds, right?
Wow.
So I was in like metabolic dysfunction, very stressful, that time just for law enforcement and any first responder, right? Even nurses, you didn't know if people were going to die or live, but you had, everybody else is locked down. Kids are learning, in the dining room, but you got to go to work, and it was great. There was no traffic, but we had to throw ourselves in harm's way and do what we signed up to do. Um, but then you start to focus more on your career and the family, and then you start to forget about yourself. So, not to go into all my health problems that I was having, but the one pivotal thing for me was the heart. So I had an echocardiogram, I had four valves that were regurgitating, triglycerides were out of whack, blood sugar was out of whack. And that was really kind of like, I'm not immortal. That was my moment. My father died at 68 of stubbornness, is what I tell everybody. But I was headed there, and you're in great shape in your 20s, your 30s. You kind of let them get away from you. That creeps into your 40s, and I was no exception to that.
Yeah.
And then it was like, all right, uh, do I want to live to be 68 or do I want to live beyond that? We've given a lot to this profession, these careers. You want to retire and you want to be able to enjoy your life. So that's kind of what I my epiphany was, got to take care of me first. And
Yeah.
then, and then, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. So it just makes you more effective as a leader, makes you more effective as a parent, makes you more effective as a father, as a spouse, if you don't do self, health, wealth, relationships and career, if you don't prioritize things in that order and you start to shuffle things, there's going to be downstream consequences.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I think that the one thing that, I kind of took from that too is like, what's the why? Like why, because I'm sure when you had an epiphany like that, you start thinking about everything. You start thinking about yourself, but you also start thinking about your family. Like, man, like I want to be here for them longer. Like I don't want my kids or my spouse to lose me at a young age like I did, with my father. So you start to think about like what is important to you. And I do really think it's an effective strategy as a proactive measure. I don't think that although I do think that maybe we have a tendency to wait until, something like that happens to put things in perspective. I think that we can start now having these conversations of, how can we proactively ask ourselves those questions? How can we, identify why it's important for us to be physically, mentally, financially, emotionally well, And then what are those things that we can do to get us there? And
Right.
it doesn't have to mean that you're broken. Like you can start these things early. I had a young officer recently, like he basically was like, "Yeah, I don't need to deal with any of that stuff because I'm really young." And I'm like, "That's exactly why you should do it now." Like why wait until there's an injury to then think about it? Why wait until you're in a mountain of debt to start thinking about, putting away money so that you're okay? Like, why do we have to wait until these things happen? And I think, again, it's human nature, but because you've experienced those things, because I've also experienced those things, how can people learn from us to be more proactive? And then the other thing you said to me that I really wanted to bring back up was, if people aren't willing to identify those things within themselves or aren't willing to take care of themselves, maybe they're also stubborn. I don't know. But, how can we train the family to be able to identify these signs and these things? And you and I talked a little bit about this offline about, you know, spousal support, spousal training to be able to then, be a stronger unit when it comes to taking care of each other. Do you think that there should be more resources and training provided by an organization for the spouses?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no requirement now for spouses to even be involved, or
Mm.
and it doesn't need to be just the spouse. I mean, we're hiring a lot of officers that still live at home, in their
Yeah.
early 20s, but it's just educating the families, the parents. The parents are the ones that are going to notice the difference, I think, in their
Mm.
kids. Um, Depending on when you meet your spouse, they may meet you, you're already on the hypervigilant roller coaster.
Yeah,
Um, but
interesting
I,
point.
but I think maybe your mom and your dad, if they know you well enough, they're going to notice a difference based upon the career and the path that you've chosen as a first responder.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not required reading, like it's very easy. I guess I would say start them earlier in their career, but you don't even know that you're gonna experience it, and everybody's like, that's not gonna happen to me. I'm this. I'm hardened. I'm a Marine. Substitute adjective in there to where you think that none of this is ever gonna affect you, and it's BS. You know, at some point there's going to be a call, there's going to be a situation, there's going to be a case that you investigated that is just not going to sit right with you.
Mm.
And if you don't have those positive outlets to talk about it, to get it off your chest, to have somebody tell you that what your experience is not abnormal, there's nothing wrong with you, you're a human. Um, and if you didn't feel the things that you were feeling, then we would actually be worried about you because you might be a sociopath or whatever.
Right.
So I think just removing the stigma out of it, and if we're doing that as an organization, I'll be the first one to go. Like, hey, did everybody go? No, I'll be the first one.
Yeah.
Volunteer as the organizational leader. We set the tone. May not know it or not, but everybody below you is looking at you. Everything you do, what you do, what you don't do, they are very observant and in tune, just like your children.
Yeah.
So the sooner that we can be out about it, forefront, this is what we're doing. I wholeheartedly support it. Even when it was pitched, I was down in the briefing room with the squads. I was there, heard the pitch. I gave my 2 cents, talked a little bit about my personal journey, and said, yeah, this is going to be a great thing for us. I met with the union leadership. They're behind it 100%. And I'm pretty excited about it because, talking to a couple other neighboring towns, I think we're going to be one of the first ones that's like, no, we're going to do this. That's your work day. I'm going to send you when you're working. Encourage them to, discuss it with the spouses, the loved ones. But at some point, I do think that we will involve them in some form or fashion because they are another set of eyes and ears, and they could be that early warning for the officers.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I did want to ask you, kind of what you think about the future of resiliency and wellness and, creating organizational care. What do you think the future does look like? Like, obviously, there's been a lot of forward movement in the right direction when it comes to wellness and resiliency and culture, but what do you think? If you could like wave a magic wand and kind of predict the future.
When it comes to mental health and resiliency,
Yeah.
you know, that's a tough one. And I always look back to this, we have this perpetual, we have so many training requirements, but we never pause operationally. And that's where the military is like, we do things almost in triplicate. So if you look at the way that a Marine Expeditionary Unit deploys, right, you'll have one that's training, you'll have one that's deployed, and you'll have one that just came back, and they're kind of like exfilling and they're, demobbing. You almost want to look at law enforcement like that. You have the guys who are running and gunning in the streets, but you want to pull people out of those dynamic environments just to let them deprogram their brains.
Mm.
Um, and we don't have a SWAT team. It's like a regional thing here, but the guys that kind of do that all the time, day in and day out, day in and day out, if we don't pause that operational tempo for them and give them a mental health component and give them some decompression time, like you think we're exacerbating pre-existing problems.
Right.
So if I could wave my magic wand over it, you would take what you have and double it.
Mm.
And while you had guys and girls who were out operationally, you then have another complement of the ones that were doing their training requirements, that were doing, and giving them a little bit of a break, because
Yeah.
it's difficult depending on the size of the organization to give them those operational pauses so they can come off the hypervigilant roller coaster.
I like that. I actually haven't had a lot of conversations. I've had a few, but not a lot of conversations that really put focus on rest. How can we give some space and then how can we offload some of that stuff sometimes? So I do appreciate that. And I think that rest is really, really important. And we don't get any of it
No.
sometimes. Like and you also are not we're not only talking about careers. Like we also have to consider that they're going home and now they're mom, dad, son, daughter, and they're at soccer game and they're doing all the things that everyone else does on top of this. And so I think we also have to consider that. It's like how can we create space for them to decompress and rest from all of it?
Right. And I think it's important for organizational leaders to really be in tune to this stuff, because if you look at some of the things that just come in the business, we're exacerbating the problem, right?
Mm.
24 hour or, adverse work schedules. So our guys and girls, they work a 12-hour shift on the patrol side, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that's a steady shift. So the science is out there. Look at what, being awake when everyone else is sleeping does, to your bodies,
Yeah.
So, and I worked midnights for 7 years. It's like being in a constant state of jet lag.
Yeah.
And what we're asking them to do, the nutrition isn't the best, your sleeping isn't the best, because you have those added responsibilities at home, and the police officer's wife or husband, they don't work, you know, overnight. So, it's very difficult to kind of maintain that. Um, and then we're asking you to make split second decisions. We're asking you to do all of these things. And, I can go on for about an hour about law enforcement has now become the only profession in the world where you cannot make a mistake.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of
Uh,
pressure.
so we're not really putting them in the best positions for success, and we have to realize that. For example, had an officer, cracked up a car. Wasn't his first one, working nights, just had a baby. Okay, well, I could discipline that thing, or we can look at that from a resiliency standpoint. Everything okay at home? Wow, the baby's not sleeping. I get home, the wife goes to work. I got to watch the kid. The officer's not sleeping like a normal human being. So how can I discipline that, assuming that, oh, you got a great night's, worth of sleep, because that's not the reality.
Right.
And I know what that's like, because I've done it before.
Yeah.
The neighbors are out cutting their grass and you're trying to sleep, but you got to go to work again.
Yeah.
Um, So it's really important for us as leaders to kind of recognize that, cut them some slack. You've been there, hopefully, hopefully there's no chiefs out there that didn't work the road and didn't, put their time in the trenches. But I know exactly what that's like. Were they doing it on purpose? No. It was an accident. Accidents are going to happen. Discipline them accordingly, and try to take care of it through a resiliency or a mental health avenue first.
Yeah, no, I really, I mean, obviously there's a great deal of empathy that you just explained of saying like, hey, I understand what you're going through, but it's also remembering where we came from.
Hmm.
I think that regardless of what profession, and, I think that you're absolutely correct that you are the only profession in the world that everyone expects perfection, and perfection is not attainable. And so you're already set up for failure because no one's ever going to be perfect. But regardless of what profession, I think that sometimes we kind of reach these pinnacles in our career and then we forget where we came from. We forget what it's like to feel a certain way. We forget what it's like, in your example, to work nights or have a new baby or to, make these small mistakes because you're sleep deprived. I think it's important for us to ground ourselves sometimes and, have a little bit of that humility and also that remembering of like, hey, like, I know exactly what that's like, and I can have empathy for this situation, and then we can decide the best way forward from there. So, my final question for you, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I feel like you're right. We could talk for hours and hours and hours about this stuff. But, for the younger men and women who are coming into this career, what words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier when you were starting out, or, something that you've learned along the way that's been really instrumental for you.
Um, I think it's just good advice, just in general, is hear everyone, but only listen to a select few,
Mm,
right? So everyone's going to have an opinion about everything, but so hear it all. But really, when it crafts who you become, what you do or don't do on this job, what you're looking to get out of it, only listen to a couple, you
mm,
know, because a lot of people just talk to talk, and you know, listening for the right reasons hopefully will help them out in their careers. And just don't don't believe the media, I guess, is what my biggest message is. And in talking about, don't forget where you came from. I can say that I know exactly what it's like to be out there, but the reality is that I don't, because we're in a different time and place now than it was 20 years ago. Um, Public support isn't what it once was for law enforcement. The media isn't what it once was when it comes to law enforcement, and we've become so politicized
mm,
as an organization, and it's really unfair. uh, I will say to the officers, the younger officers out there, that there is a silent majority out there that do support you, and they do support what we do. In the community that I, am fortunate enough to be the chief over, there's a lot of people here that love us, and I'm going to say that that's the majority love us.
mm.
Now, are they the ones that are out on the news at night? No, they're not. Are they the loudest voice on social media? Probably not. But just take it with a grain of salt, because there is a silent majority in this country that is very pro law enforcement. They want safety and security for their schools, for their kids, for themselves. So it's easy to be distracted by what a headline or a 30-second news clip is, but that's for commercialism. I
Yeah.
would just say to the younger officers out there, if you want to get into the profession and do the right thing, there are enough people that are still like that want that. Don't just get discouraged by what's happening around you. Um, and I guess that would be the advice.
I love
But
it.
it's different. It's definitely different. And don't forget about yourself, right? You are the most important thing, and don't ever lose focus inside of that. So always take care of your mental health, your physical health, be the best version of yourself and present the best version of yourself every day in whatever it is that you do. And you'll have great success doing that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on here. I actually really enjoyed this conversation. So I appreciate your perspectives and everything that you're doing organizationally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.